As we continue our discussion on the fundamental skills of blacksmithing, the next thing to look at is going to be bending. And there are lots of circumstances in blacksmithing where you need to bend something or sometimes unbend something to straighten it back out again if it's getting a little bit wobbly and wonky as you work on it. So let's light the forge and take a look at some of the basics of bending steel. And today we're going to be working in the single burner chili forge. Now, one real common application for bending is putting rings on the end of handles. These are common on tools like this, pokers and shovels, and they're also quite often found on things like cooking forks and spatulas. Lots of places you might want a ring on the end of a bar, and it's very typical to draw this out into a long, skinny taper and put a little curl on there. So that's another bend that you're going to put on there as you make these rings. So that's where we're going to start off today. Today I'm just going to make this a square taper, but you could also do a round taper if that's your preference. Now I want to put a nice little curl on the end of this taper. This is not a place for brute force. This is a finesse job, and you don't want to continually work in the exact same place or you'll end up creating kinks and flat spots. The next thing we want to do is come back and start our bend for the handle by bending the transition point away for the handle. This does not need to be a 90-degree bend. You can see how the inertia of the bar actually starts to curl this up, so that's working in your favor. Now, if you're worried about damaging this little curl you put on the end here as you shape this ring, it's okay to selectively cool that as long as you're not working in hardenable steel that would get brittle if you did that. It's one reason to use new mild steel instead of random stuff you find, because you have no idea if that would crack it or not. This is probably best done working over the horn of the anvil. You'll notice that too much heat down in here makes it hard to get a good controlled bend on the end. So it's worth controlling your heat. I can pour a little water over that to keep that cool. Much easier to keep in control this way. You'll notice that I've lost some of my back bend there though. And that's easy enough to correct. Now we can make some final adjustments at the face of the anvil. That's not bad. You can fiddle with that as much as you want. A cone mandrel that is perfectly round can often be a benefit. I don't have a cone mandrel that fits this anvil, so that's not an option for me working over in this shop. But if you have one, this is a good time to use one because a cone mandrel will fit an infinite variety of circles within its size limit. So you can see how working that around the mandrel would really clean up the diameter of that circle. Now, in addition to a cone mandrel, there are all sorts of other jigs and fixtures that you can make that are going to help you bend things in the shop. And the bends don't always have to be perfectly round circles. There are angular bends, there are slow arcs or oval type bends, scrolls, all sorts of things that we can bend. These are just some simple shop-made jigs that I use for a set of campfire irons. Just like the cone mandrel, these don't fit this anvil, but I can put them in the vise and we can go ahead and take a look at how those bends are done. Not all that much different than this, but it goes a lot quicker using jigs. Learn to do these bends at the anvil first so you get good at it, and that opens up a lot of doors for you. When you need lots of repetition, that's when you go to the jigs and the fixtures. And all these bars for these campfire sets start off with a short taper and a little curl on the end. This little jig does multiple bends, and I do this in 2 heats. The first heat creates a U shape, and then the second heat will create a back bend in there so that the U is facing the top of the bar. There again, a good tight heat would help this. It's a little bit loose, but I can straighten that out at the anvil before I go on. For these sets, I make 2 just like this, and I've done a video on this entire process in the past. Today we're just talking about the bending process, not the twist or not the point. Now the third bar in these sets gets just a round ring, and so that all my rings are the same, I welded up a jig. It's just a piece of, looks like 2-inch round bar with a little tab on the side that I can hook the end over and get a nice round ring. Nothing very fancy, and you don't need to be a very good welder to make jigs like this. I frequently do these in a couple of heats, and doing it in the vise, I will have to rotate the jig so I have more space, so I'll definitely have to take more than 1 heat. I do take the time to cool off the end of it so I don't squish my little curl there. So I have to turn that one more time. You'll notice that I did not put the back bend in this like we did on the previous example. I find it easy enough to do that at the horn of the anvil after I've got all of this done. And that way I don't have to worry about calculating out the exact amount of material necessary for that bend point. If something is a little bit different one set to the other, it's easy to account for that by doing the back bend last. Now that cooking set really isn't complete without a hook to hang your coffee pot from, so let's go ahead and make an S-hook. And like most things, this involves more than one fundamental skill. So far you've seen not just bending today, but we've done a fair amount of drawing out in very simple terms. The S-hook also involves some drawing out. I'm going to put the little curl on the end, bend the hook, but it also gets a twist, which is another fundamental skill that we'll look at in a future video. Here again, I think you should get comfortable doing things like this over the horn of the anvil or even at the edge of the anvil, which takes a little bit more skill to get a round bend doing it freehand like that. But that's a skill you should develop as you're learning to bend things, to do it at the anvil. Since I make hundreds of these in a year sometimes, I use a jig so that they all come out the same, and it greatly speeds my production on these. If you're just making one or two, it's probably not worth your time and trouble to make the jig. And here again, the jig is just a simple welded up piece. It's got a piece of 3/4 inch black pipe that serves as the form to bend the hook around, and just another little pin next to it so that I can hook the material in there and get that bend. Having the right amount of heat makes this go a lot better. And working in a gas forge, you learn pretty quickly as you do a batch of these how far to push the piece into the forge so that you get just that right heat. When things are going really well, I can usually draw this out, bend the curl, and in that same heat still be able to get the bend for the hook done. But take as many heats as you need. We'll go ahead and put the twist in this just so we can see the finished product. This also gives me a chance to straighten it in this last heat. This is why I don't do the twist first. Now those are some examples of some fairly utilitarian uses for bending. But in ornamental work, there are lots and lots of places where you're going to need to do controlled bending, and you're going to need to be able to do things to fit exact sizes so that the pieces fit where you want them to fit. One example of that is a 90-degree square corner. This involves not only bending, but also involves upsetting because a corner needs a little bit more mass than the bar on either side. So it's something you need to do test pieces and experiment with to know exactly how much material you need to allow for. But once you've got all that figured out, put a center punch mark on the side of the bar so you can keep an eye on that mark as you do your bend. You keep that centered in that corner and get the corner just right. You should come out with what you're looking for. Now, of course, this starts with a bend, but not an exact 90 degrees. You want to stop a little bit short so you can do the upsetting. Now you can see my mark is a little bit off there, but I'll be able to drive that down and bring that back where I want it. Now my corner is right there, right where I want it. Now this is the upsetting part. This is some place that a good isolated heat from a torch really comes in handy. And perhaps some place where a coal forge would be better than the gas forge. But we can absolutely do this in the gas forge. It might also help if we put it in the vise so that it doesn't move around so much. There's my center punch mark, pretty close to the corner. Now it's really down to just refining that, but that's a good example of an upset square corner, which is another more advanced form of bending. And also another excellent example of how these fundamental processes combine to create what you're looking to create. Very rarely is one used in total isolation of any of the other skills. There's one last bend that I think we should look at that you'll probably do if you're getting into ornamental work, and that's scrolling. I'm going to start with a little piece of 1/8 by 3/4, very lightweight, simple scroll. And here again, I think you should learn to do this at the anvil before you go to jigs and fixtures. One of the things that sets forged scrolls apart from fabricated scrolls is the fact that something is usually done to the end. At the very least, they're tapered out into what's called a ribbon scroll. Sometimes they're flared into a fishtail, all sorts of different scroll ends. So I'm going to start by flaring this out into a fishtail, and we'll do a little fishtail scroll. Nothing very fancy, just to look at this form of bending. There are a number of key factors in bending scrolls evenly. One is a good controlled heat. A scroll is going to want to bend evenly if the heat is even, but if you have a hot spot, it's going to bend easier there, and it's going to be harder to bend in the cold spot. Same thing goes for thickness. If you're tapering the scroll, you want a nice even taper. The thin spots are going to bend easier, the thick spots are going to bend harder. So if you have a thin spot that gets really hot, you're going to end up with a kink there when you bend your scroll. If you have a thick spot that stays cooler when you're heating it, you're going to have a flat spot of the scroll, and it's going to be hard to get it to bend properly. So the better you prepare your material, the better off you're going to be. The other issue is making sure that you aren't just hitting in the same place over and over again. You need to keep looking at what's happening and address whatever issues happen to be forming. If you're getting a kink and you keep hammering in the same spot, the kink's just going to get worse. It's more about finesse than it is brute strength. Often the process of bending scrolls is referred to as turning a scroll. And that perhaps sets your mind to a different process than just go after it, hammers and tongs, and bend it. You want to turn it slowly and carefully and try to get it even. And as important as it is to learn how to do scrolls at the anvil, if you need lots of scrolls that all look the same, going to a scroll jig is certainly a viable option. Let's look at taking the next heat on this using a scroll jig, sometimes also referred to as a scroll form. The bending fork can come in handy when you're working in a scroll form to make sure things pull in just right. I think I'll take one more heat. I think we'll take a look at bending forks as a separate video in the future. Do take the time to make sure your scroll is in line the way it's supposed to be. So that's just a real simple look at bending scrolls. That's an entire subject of its own. In fact, it could probably be a dozen different videos because there are so many different styles of scrolls and a lot of different approaches to how you bend or turn a scroll. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking your time to watch this video. If you would like to help provide financial support to keep these videos going in the future, You can do that through channel memberships, click down below, or through Patreon patronage. Channel members receive early access to the videos. Patreon patrons not only receive early access, but they receive the videos ad-free over on Patreon. So if you're tired of the annoying YouTube ads, Patreon may just be for you. In the meantime, I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.